So I need to ask this question. So because we're in Canada, my husband is a gas fitter. Like he literally works on furnaces and a lot of other things. He's plumber, gas fitter. So in Canada, his busiest time is winter. And if someone is living in a trailer and the power goes out and everything starts to freeze, they're calling him. And it could be any time, might be a Sabbath, might not be. But then it's like, where does the like, is he now going against God by going and helping get a furnace going?
Hutch.
If things are, yeah.
Yeah, good question, Chrissy. Good question, Hutch.
Well, Chrissy, I would put it almost in the same context of, Deneen, you're a nurse, right? I don't know if you work in like a trauma center or anything, but if you get called in on Shabbat for the preservation of life, there is a little bit of leeway there. So Chrissy, if your husband, if somebody, we know that because if it's dangerous that they could end up freezing to death or creating such detrimental damage to their home or their life, I'd say that it would probably be okay. Now, probably the best thing to do would just be like, hey, is there any other solution that you come up with before having to go and do that? Maybe. But if somebody's truly like worried that they're going to freeze to death, or if it's not a true emergency, I mean, that's probably the only way that I would maybe think about doing it. Is it negative 55 degrees? Yes, then I think I would say that's definitely worth of trying to get it. If it's 35 degrees and they can make it till the next morning, great. But I think just finding out a little bit more of the details and that's how I would probably just handle it.
Awesome, Hutch. Preservation of life, key point. Lance.
Just commenting on Chrissy's thing. So I'm a fire alarm service tech. So I battle this same exact issue where like we have on-call schedules and every so often, we'll go on call. But for over a year, I just keep trading my on-call. So I don't do it. But I battle the same thing. And with me, it's not as clear as what your husband seems to be facing, where, oh, it's the winter. Like if it's like the fall, and that seems pretty. Or if it's like furnace maintenance, oh, he's gonna change an air filter. Like that's probably not a good. That's probably not an emergency. And with me in my situation, it's like, oh, the fire alarm panel has a smoke detector that's dirty. It's like that's not okay. No matter how I spin that, that's not an emergency. Now there are like certain like, oh, this hospital's having a problem and their whole system's down, and if that building catches on fire, there's a lot of people that are gonna die. Like, so like there are emergencies. So on one hand, in my head, it's okay, like does this qualify as like preserving life and being an emergency? And yeah, but the truth is, at least in my situation, people don't use it for that. It's while we're already on call for things like that, the Denny's or Hill Air Force Base, they'll have a problem and they just want the beeping to stop. And that's not an emergency. That's not. So for me, what I've kind of come to is I trade away my on-call, and at some point I won't be able to avoid it. I'll have to do it, and it's just we do the best we can with where we're at, with what we got, and at some point I'll have to switch careers. Like that's what I'm gonna have to do. So with your husband's situation, it's just do the best. Like from my perspective, it's just do the best you can with what you got, and you know. If it gets too bad and it's not, people keep calling for air filter replacements on the Sabbath, like, maybe switch careers. And I don't say that lightly because that's what I'm facing. So that's best. That's what I got on that.
Thanks, Lance. And you, Annie, I think we skipped you. So, and I don't know, I think he was before you, Eric. I don't know, but you, Annie.
Well, that's okay. The thing is, the Savior himself gave the answer. Any man that has an ox in a ditch on the Sabbath would go pull it out. And if it's mired in the ditch in mud, it more likely can stay there a few hours. Many of them do. so long as you can get them water and food. But you go do it because it's your animal. And there is a chance it could die. But also, I had one of the best jobs in my life, working in a creamery under a government contract, making powdered milk. And we would fill up a train that was literally a mile long from floor to ceiling with powdered milk that they would take to their underground bases. And they would put in storage for a couple of years. And it was a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week job. And the money was unbelievable. But I was required to work on Shabbat. And I told them I couldn't. And I had to walk away from that job and lost a lot of stuff, but the Lord took care of me and blessed me by opening other doors. The point being, it's like being a nurse, as was first brought up, or something else. If there is a real need, and someone freezing to death is a real need, it's not a problem. The Savior wouldn't have a problem with it. That's an ox in a ditch. But too many people make the fact that they're out of sugar and need to go to the store an ox in the ditch. You know? So it's just a question of wisdom and the true need. And when you can be honest like that, then that goes away. You don't have to worry if you're doing something that, number one, is your job, and number two, is literally something that would save somebody's life. And you can transfer it like Lance on things that was not super critical. You can make trades. There are people that would want the overtime and the extra money and stuff. It's just a question of planning ahead, being wise, and not abusing the principle to get out of it, so to speak.
Good point.
So I rest.
Eric.
I have a slightly different perspective on this. This comes up, I see this coming up the most often for people that have the professions like doctor, nurse, police officer, all these public service type professions. I do not believe the preservation of life is a correct doctrine at all. I think that's a rabbinic doctrine. It has absolutely nothing to do. And I will use evidence of that as in the rabbinic world, the preservation of life will trump Torah, right? So now it's okay for me to shove a needle with a pig in it in my arm to take a vaccination if it's considered to be in the preservation of life. So screw the Torah. If I can justify in my mind preservation of life, I can do whatever the hell I want. So I do not believe for a second that preservation of life is the correct doctrine to be pulled from the Torah in this regard. The correct doctrine that we see is nearly every single time that Christ is accused of Sabbath breaking, he either explains, in the case that Yuani brought up with the ox in the ditch, or whether he explains it or not, is in the case of when they're wandering through a field and the disciples are plucking the wheat. Each time he is accused of Sabbath breaking, they are in fact doing something that is keeping a commandment of God. Okay? So although in the case of the plucking the wheat, the answer went into the whole hand washing thing, the simple reality is if a stranger wanders through your field, he's allowed to pluck the wheat. You can't and eat it. You can't violate the Sabbath, because one of the things we're supposed to do on the Sabbath is keep it holy. How do you keep it holy? You keep his commandments. So my theory is the correct doctrine that should be applied is you cannot break or violate the Sabbath by keeping one of God's commandments on the Sabbath. Okay, so if that is in fact the overarching principle that comes into play, then in this particular case, or any case where we're talking about a preservation of life thing, and so in this particular case, you're up in Canada, it's cold as hell, somebody's furnace goes out, if their furnace doesn't come back on, they're no kidding, could die. And they need help. Okay, so that would obviously go into what we would normally talk about, this preservation of life thing. I don't think going over and helping them is the problem. I think the problem is accepting money for it. And so if you have one of those professions, that's where you run into the trouble, is you're using that excuse and then you're taking the money. And so now you are doing it as your professional thing, as opposed to doing it of helping others. And I don't know I don't know how to fix that if that's the profession that, if you're in a profession that does that that ends up having that kind of stuff, whether you work in an emergency room or police officer, or in this case, life-threatening furnace going out because it's, you guys chose poorly and you live in Canada. I'm kidding. But it's besides, how can we even tell the Sabbath in the winter? The sun
I
goes
caught
down, it
that
never comes
gig.
up again. How do you even know it's the Sabbath? Anyway.
I'm just trying to work out how this would work, Eric. I'm trying to work it out in my brain.
But
Because
anyway,
last
if I was in that scenario, and trust me, I'm about to be in this scenario because I'm working for a reserve squatter now, so they're going to want to work on the weekend. So I'm screwed. I'm going to find myself in the same freaking problem. I think that the answer is, if that stuff needs to be done because somebody's in trouble and they need help. I think the answer is go help them, but if you want to keep if you want to keep your conscience clear, don't accept any money for it. Just go help them.
Darn it all, Eric. This is making way too much sense because
I know but that's I
think you're right. I really
I
do
think I'm right
you
too.
are right.
I don't see another way around it. So if you're going to go help, go help. I don't think there's anything wrong with going and help. I think where you start to get into shaky ground is if you accept payment. That's where I think the trouble lies. And I think, if that's your profession and that's how you're earning your living, that sort of sucks. But if you don't want to find a new job, if you want to keep doing what you're doing, then may I suggest the right answer is to, if the emergency situation pops up on the weekend, go do it, but do it for free. And then I think you might be on some solid ground. Would be my suggestion.
Yeah, because after the reading, I was called in for an emergency, and it was my response when they called me was, try to find someone else. If you can't find someone else, call me back. Oh, but Deneen, we need your skills. Please come in. I tried. I went down the list. You're at I'm the bottom of the barrel because they know I don't work on Sabbath, and so I know if they're calling me, they're at the no, there is nobody with your skills, Deneen. Please come in. It's an emergency. Okay, so I went in and helped. But how would that go without accepting payment? I would have to say, okay, I'm coming in, but don't record it because I don't want to get paid for it.
Yeah, and I in the world that we live in, therein lies the challenge, right?
Yeah.
So try to get your bank, if you think usury is no good, try to get your bank to not give you interest.
Yeah. Right.
I got Navy Federal Credit Union to do that at one point before I was like, it doesn't matter. But USAA, when interest rates, when 2008 happened and interest rates went to zero. So, right. So the interest was on the entire amount of money I had with USAA, the interest on it was like 1 penny per month or whatever. Right. And I called them and I said, hey, instead of giving me that 1 penny, how about we just call it good? You take it all the way to zero. How about we not do it at all? And they're like, nope, our system has no way to do that whatsoever. We have to pay you the interest. So anyway, so I agree with you. That is the challenge of, okay, if it has to happen on the Sabbath, if you can't find anybody else, if somebody needs my help and I'm uniquely qualified for it, then I will volunteer. But I don't want money on it. And even that as what's the word I'm looking for? It's not righteous, as
Noble or
noble, humble, whatever, as much as that is all those good things, to do it just out of the kindness of your heart for free, I'll bet that you run into problems with that. They're like, no, we have to pay you because of liability and blah 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 blah.
Exactly.
There'll be a million legal reasons why they're like, if you come in, we have to pay you. But if you what can you do if you try, right? You can try. You can say, okay, I if it has to be me on the Sabbath and it's a life or death situation or whatever, I volunteer. Okay, I will come in and do the help, but I would prefer not to get paid. You might find out that that's not possible. In which case, what else are you going to do? We got scattered into the world. They're going on their rules. Just do the best you, like Lance said, do the best you can with what you got where you're at. But I would say, if you're going to use the preservation of life argument, cool. Try not to get paid for it. because your argument kind of goes down in quicksand as soon as you accept the cash.
Yeah, totally. Dander.
Yeah, there's no way, like, but they make you clock in and stuff. But what if you work and then you donated the whole thing?
So just understand, I don't think there's a right answer here.
Right.
I don't think there's a right answer. I think so when you apply, what Lance just brought up of do the best you can with what you got where you're at, that's a great idea. I mean, that's a great idea. So go ahead and don't donate it to a worthy cause or whatever, trying to say, God, I don't want this, right? I was just trying to help somebody. I was trying to walk in your commandment. I don't want the money because because my heart's in the right condition. I'm trying not to work for money on the Sabbath per your true commandment there. And they refuse to not pay me. Therefore, I'm going to take this and give it to widows and orphans, right? Is that perfect? Hell no, it's not perfect, but it's doing the best you can with what you got where you're at. And I would argue it's a demonstration to God that your heart is in the right place, which is, as we've been talking about, isn't that what it's really about? Whether or not you want to walk in obedience. And if you want to walk in obedience and you're trying to do everything you can in order to do so, whether or not you're successful in being perfect is not the issue. The issue is whether or not you wanted to try.
Can I
Right. So the reason I brought it up is because when I first came into this and I didn't know about the Sabbath, I had a part-time job. It was only Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And while I wrestled with it for 2 months, I took the money I made, and not even the taxes. So like I made $75 on Saturday, and for 2 months I just put $75 away. And then I went to my boss and I said, hey, I can't work Saturdays anymore. I was like, if you need me to resign, I'll resign, or you could replace me. Well, she found someone to replace me just on Saturdays, which is weird because it's only a 3-day job. I donated all that money to an outreach for homeless. And then, because then I started keeping Shabbat, about 4 months later, after they gave me the Saturday off, they said, hey, we really like you having around. Now I'm full time at this place. I got kicked out of my place and they have an apartment, and now I live on the farm that I work at. So I believe that was all because of my obedience that I did that. And like I said, I don't deal with emergencies, but since I didn't know I was supposed to do and I was wrestling that, that's what I came up with.
I love that. That's a great testimony. Hutch.
Now I already know this answer, but I just want to ask this for playing devil's advocate a little bit. Now, the thought process of, in case anybody's thinking about it, that's why I want to bring it up. Do you think it's okay that if we're trying not to accept payment on the Sabbath, right? But it's like, okay, we'll square up later on or something like that and wait a couple days and then send an invoice. But if the work is being done on Sabbath, so I just want to put that out there for people who might be thinking, well, as long as I don't accept it. Now, because I can say for certain, I messed up earlier this year. I was selling, I forgot what I was selling, but I sold something on Facebook. I sold a big bagger for the back of my lawnmower. And I was messaging on Facebook Marketplace with this person, and it was the husband's wife was messaging me on behalf of him. And and she was like, oh, okay, I can be there tomorrow, as in Saturday. And I was like, I can't do Saturday. I was like, but I'll take off like $5 or something, or $10 if you can come on Sunday. And she said, okay, great. And then on Saturday, and they were coming from like 2 hours away. So I'm in Northwest Arkansas. They're coming from Oklahoma, and probably was over an hour and a half away. And I got a text from them. They're like, oh, we're like 10 minutes out. And I was like, looking at my phone, and it's on Saturday. And I was like, you could be freaking kidding me. I was like, I didn't know what to do. I was like, I felt so bad. And I did the wrong thing. What happened, I let them still come to the house, and I gave them the bagger, but I didn't touch the money. And I should have refused the money, and I should have just given it to them or whatever, or, told them not to come. But I just had them put money like inside my shop. And I was like, at least I didn't touch it. It really tore me up for a while, and I knew it was wrong, but now I know how to handle it going forward. But it's just funny how in that time I was like, I don't know what to do. I was just so like, I tried to do everything right, and they showed up the day early, tried to still pay me, and I don't know. It was just an interesting story at the time.
It's a great story, but this is the stuff we run into. But it shows where your heart is, Hutch. Oh my gosh,
that's a great story, Hutch. And then I immediately, when you said that, because I've done this and mulled this over and gone through it as well, and then I never stopped getting reminded of Deuteronomy, next week's Torah portion, actually, Deuteronomy 24:15. In the same day, you shall give him his wages when somebody works for you. Do not let the sun go down on it, for he is poor and has lifted up his heart on it, so that he cry not against you, Yahovah, and it be a sin against you. So there you go. It's also against Torah to not get paid on the same day you do the work.
Lance, you had your hand up there, and
I
you,
was,
Annie.
I was just going to comment on it, but you can go.
Well, the thing is, Yahovah, not Yahovah, Hasatan, loves to integrate and intertwine. That's why it's called wickedness. A wick is intertwined different threads of the yarn or the twine. And so he takes his wicked ways and intertwines it with the righteous ways. And that's why we have fetal cells in our food called natural flavorings and stuff like that. It's as many processes as possible. He tries to make wicked intertwined with evil. So by very existence, unless we bring ourselves out from it, we condemn ourselves or we become filthy without even, because we're just trying to live and survive. And it's like you, Lance, pointing out all the different ingredients they mask pig and put in our food, marshmallows and everything else. And they call it by other names rather than by pork. So that's the key. We have to be watchful. Ended in scripture, watch, be cognizant, be on guard. So it's getting worse and worse as the world. Something we have to take into our reasoning and accounting. And it makes it very tough if you want to live clean, to live in society that intermixes everything, and the people in control deliberately do that. Anyway, I rest.
Lance.
I'm jumping back in line for the question.
Yeah.
Is that cool? Can I do that?
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, I'm gonna put the question in the chat. So I posted this question on the Bear Independent Patreon, and I'm very sure he's gonna make a video about it, but he hasn't yet. So I want to say the question, and I think this is one of those questions that we go into next week, unless you ladies want to just handle it. So the question, what is biblical womanhood? Biblical manhood makes sense to me. For example, God left enemies in the land to teach future generations warfare. And in Proverbs 31, the man is described as sitting at the gates among the city leaders. People often bring up Sarah and Abraham, and it's clear that we don't deserve a woman's submission like Sarah's unless we live faithfully like Abraham did. It's not a one-way street. But biblical womanhood seems less clear. Is it be a warrior like Jael, who drove a tent peg through Sisera? Is it being a capable wife, like the Proverbs 31 woman, managing her household and clothing her family? Is it teaching and prophesying like Deborah? Biblical manhood is straightforward, but biblical womanhood confuses me. I'd love to hear your opinion. That's what I'm posting on the Bear Independent. So I don't know if you guys want to take it or if we want to think about it and then maybe touch on it later. But
yeah, well, that's exactly what we're talking about in our women's studies on Wednesday night. And I don't know if any of the ladies have a comment about that. But I think the key, I will say this, Lance. If the Bible is comprised of mostly stories about men, because if it was all about women, men wouldn't read it. And so there's throughout the whole Bible, there are these stories about women that are not the main characters, with the exception of Esther and Ruth. So they're woven and they're hidden, and you have to seek them out. And that's what we're trying to do on Wednesday night. But yeah, very good question. I would love to tackle it, but I'm going to shut up because
I'm not in that women's group. So
I'm
maybe
going to shut up because I want to hear from the people that have their hands up. You, Annie, and then Hutch.
Okay. I have a friend in Israel named Nama. Could you email me the link for the Wednesday night? I don't know if she'll show up, but she's been looking for a women's group. So I
Okay.
would like to forward that. The thing is, I have a very different perspective because of my native heritage. My indigenous native after the flood. But the point is, women have leadership roles in the native, or everybody's a native. You guys are natives. In the people that were here pre-Europe, the United States government apologized to the Iroquois because the United States government was actually modeled after the Iroquois. They took credit and said they modeled it after this European and this Roman and all of that. But the truth is, it was modeled after the Iroquois Federation government. And the highest court among the Iroquois, or the Ojibwe, was the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, you had to be a woman. But not just any woman. It had to be a woman that was a widow. She was older and known by the tribes for her wisdom because she'd been through it all with men, children. And that gave her an outlook of wisdom that could not be gained any other way. And we have many women chiefs. And even now, I'm in the Mayan native. I've got my paperwork in front of me as a Mayan. But the highest council of the Mayans is a woman's council. And so, what's the point of me saying all this? God said, let us make man in our own image. Male and female created he them. And in our records, when he said us, he was talking about him and his wife. And when they made a creation, it was a man and a woman. Now, the Hebrew scriptures are not as old as ours. Ours go back all the way to Noah of the Mayan records. And it says, woman wasn't created from a rib. She was created right next to the man, and they were created back to back, spine to spine. And then the spine was separated. So they were one flesh. And so the man was not over the woman was not over the man. But then the woman emotionally made a bad choice. So the man was made over her head, not to rule her as men have falsely assumed, but to counsel. You see, a woman counsels with the man counsels with the woman, but the man makes the decision, okay? In the native way, in the way that has been handed down in our records from Noah and before. And so the woman's role is different. She's a nurturer. She takes the seed, takes 9 months of her life to bring it forth. No man could do that. And that gives her a whole different perspective. And the man's role is to protect, to cover, and provide so she can nurture in a home that's safe because of the man. Now, I don't see a problem with that because the two are acting on the same goal, just different ways. But the point being, she's not lesser in any other way, except sometimes she can get carried away by her emotions. As some of us like to joke, and I got this from a woman, she's only seen a week and a half a month. The rest of the time, her hormones are taking her emotionally all kinds of things where she'll cry at a TV commercial or something like that until she's passed and she's older. And when she's older and she's been through all the roller coaster of emotions, she's had to put up with the ego of her husband, the mischievousness of her children, and sometimes her husband. She's a very wise person when she reaches that age. And so we need to look to each other. You know, the role of a man has been set by men that like to dominate, and I'm the man, I'm the woman's supposed to listen to me. We're parts. We're equals. Yes, a man is supposed to make the decision, but he needs to lean on that wife and her perspective, because where he would react with anger because he is a protector that needs to shield the family from being destroyed, she's the nurturer. And you have to have both to make it right. So
Thanks, you, Andy.
neither role is, huh?
I just said
Neither
thanks. Sorry, I
role
thought you were
is-
done.
Oh, yeah, neither role is, I'm basically done. Neither role is more important than the other, but neither role can act without the other. Now, sometimes it's forced upon us because of death or something, but we need to realize we are a partnership. We need to be one flesh. I rest.
Thanks, you, Annie. I like your perspective on things. Let's hear from Hutch, but I also think the question was asked about a biblical woman. So I do want to get to Sandy, and Chrissy has their hands up because they're two women that I would like to get to. So, but let's go to Hutch and then Sandy and Chrissy.
I was going to make a quick 2-point part on the importance of women, besides the obvious. But basically, we know that one of the reasonings why the Bible can be confirmed is that they use women as witnesses. And in Deuteronomy, which you just read and I pointed out earlier, it's not gender specific when it says 2 to 3 witnesses. It doesn't say men. It's not gender specific. And we know in ancient times, they typically didn't use women's testimony to hold up. So I think that's pretty important. Also, too, in the 4 Gospels, the first witnesses were women. So I think, again, it kind of just drives it home, the importance. I know it's not really answering it, but I just thought just to touch on it, it's pretty cool the way that I look at it.
Awesome. Thank you, Hutch. Sandy or Chrissy, I don't know which one was first.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat what I said at Women's Study. For my notes on what an Azer is. What is an Azer? We know the attributes of an Azer, but what does it mean? Yahovah calls himself an Azer, but what does that mean? It means a protection and a shield, defending his people from their enemies and providing a safe refuge. A deliverer rescues his people from difficult situations and trials, much like a strong ally in battle. It's a source of strength, emphasizing his strength and ability to empower and sustain his people, particularly those who are vulnerable and oppressed. He's a necessary ally. It implies a necessary and vital partnership rather than a subordinate role. He's a warrior. God's role is a warrior who fights on behalf of his people. So am I saying that women are gods? No. But what I am saying is that the meaning of an Azer is to be a reflection of who God is. We are to embrace the attributes of who Yahovah says an Azer is. We are to reflect like a mirror to our husbands and others, meaning that single ladies can also be Azers as well, the most valuable attributes of our Father. That's what it means. And these are the attributes we are to have to live godly lives and be Azers, to provide a safe refuge for our families and community, to be a strong ally in battle with your husband or friend, to empower and sustain his people, especially those who are vulnerable and oppressed, to be a vital partner. You are an equal, not in a subordinate role, and to fight as a warrior alongside your spouse or fellow sisters. And then, so that's what I believe an Azer means, or what it means to be a woman. And then just last Wednesday, we talked about some interesting attributes that I believe women should have. And I believe that that we are hospitable. We should be honest. We should be brave. We should be watchful. We should be problem solvers. We should be confident. We should have strength, and we should rise among the thorns. So that is what I've gathered from our women's study on a biblical woman.
Awesome. Love it. Chrissy, let's go over to Eric.
All right, so my thoughts are more along the line of just a brainstorming idea, because I honestly haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this per se, but based on what some of the things that have just been said, and I busted open, so a few cycles of the Torah ago, every time, this idea of trying to squish the idea of 613 commandments, every time in the Torah, on that cycle when it said do this, don't do that, or whatever, I took the time to cut and paste that out and then tried to organize that. So I have, most of the commandments as I could best see, organized. Some of them are for men, some of them are for women, and so on and so forth. So I went and busted that out real quick. The ones that are specifically to women typically have to do with the monthly cycle, the blood flow, childbirth, stuff like that. And it made me start to wonder if I wonder if it's not a false premise question. And I think it's a good, don't get me wrong, I think it's a good question. I think it's especially in the society we have, it's something worth thinking about. But I wonder if instead of biblical thing, if it isn't a man-made thing or a person-made thing, if you will, this idea that there's a biblical man or a biblical woman. And as as you guys have had a little bit of a discussion on this, here's where my brain kind of went on that. Is, as you know, as Yuwani brought up and as others brought up, it says that that we're supposed to join and become one flesh when we get married, right? So what's the difference? Is there even a difference? In our society now, there's certainly there is, at the same time, again, as far as the responsibilities and this biblical womanhood or biblical manhood concept, there's no doubt that in general men are stronger, and so then it shouldn't surprise us that the when in the Torah they're talking about who's going to go fight the wars, it's the men that are eligible for that. It's the men that are called to do that. The So there are like some roles and responsibilities that are sort of defined for men. There is less like specific roles and responsibilities within the Torah defined for women. Um, However, then I go back to we're supposed to be joined as one flesh. And so whether or not you consider that to be a team or no, we're just one, or team, like that. To me, team is good. It's a way to try to wrap my brain around that, but it's probably inadequate to describe what it truly means to be one flesh, right? That's not just being on the same team. That's taking a sports analogy because we have a difficult time really wrapping our brain around the totality of what that implies to become one flesh. That's a oneness, like this oneness that Christ has with God, kind of a deal. The and so then I go to consider, well, the things that we have traditionally put into place of the role and responsibility of a man, or so on and so forth, as was sort of brought up. What happens when the man doesn't do that? Then ultimately the woman gets forced to step up and do that. Whether or not that's a biblically defined thing that the man was supposed to do or not is sort of irrelevant, because we're one flesh. And so if the person that got assigned that, whether they got assigned that by God or society or just because I was the one in position to do it when it happened, if I fail in that regard, then my wife is probably going to step up and do it because it has to get done, kind of a thing. And so, is a man's role, is a woman's role, is that something that God put on us or we put on ourselves? Some of that stuff you can make an argument for as far as the roles that are defined, like when it talks about who's going to go to war, we're talking about men, and it doesn't take long to do an overall analysis between men and women and go, yeah, that makes sense. And the but I would say a lot of other stuff is kind of in the gray area. I would say there's a lot of truth to what Yuani was talking about the nurturing nature of women as opposed to men. And so there does seem to be some stuff that we are better and worse suited for. And so there in that regard, to Sandy's point, there is a team aspect to it. My strengths, it'd be better if the person I became one with, if her strengths were where my weaknesses were and vice versa, right? That would make us a better team, to use that analogy. And the but if I don't perform to my strengths and my wife is still in this oneness with me, then she's going to get put into the situation where she's going to step up and try to do what was supposed to be my strength, because I'm failing to do so. And so I go back and forth as you guys were talking about whether or not this is a biblical manhood womanhood thing, or if we're missing the bigger point of the oneness piece, that we were supposed to become one flesh. And yes, there are some biological things that I'm better suited for. There's also just some personality things that I lean towards. There are some things that clearly are a strength of mine and a weakness of hers. There are clearly things that are a strength of hers and a weakness of mine. But at the end of the day, all that is supposed to work out together to be one. And so, so anyway, that was just my thought on that was part of it. Part of it might be a false premise. I think there's also a reality to it, which is why it's a question and why it comes up. And so I think it's worth pondering, but I'm not quite sure that there is such a thing as biblical manhood and biblical womanhood in that context is the thing. I think the thing we might be better to focus on is man, what's the depth of what he meant when he said we're supposed to be joined and we become one flesh? That might be the better question. Anyway, so that was just my brainstorming as you guys were talking, the kind of things I was thinking about.
I do like your point, Eric. Before I go over to Ioani and Chrissy, I just want to say, I guess we need to define some terms. And in my mind, I had a really good teaching that I until I hear something better, marriage is defined as a relationship between a husband and a wife, not a man and a woman. Let me say that again. When I get married, I don't want to marry a man. I want to marry a husband. I want a husband. I don't want a man. And vice versa. When you get married as a man and you get married to you don't want to marry a woman. You want her to leave that womanhood behind and you want a wife. And so that, I think, is a clue in how we become one flesh, is that there's a difference between being a man and a husband. And there's a difference between being a woman and a wife. And so definition of terms comes into it for sure. Ioani and then Chrissy.
Excellent point, Eric. I don't want to get married. I want to be joined. Man and woman, those are earthly terms. God says ish and isha. And they're the same thing. At the same root, the same everything. And what did God say? He gave us the commandments, but there was one that was not in the commandments. But it's, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord God is one." What did Yeshua say? "I'm one with my Father. I do nothing except those things that please him." The whole point to us becoming or entering into the kingdom is to be one with Yeshua, who is one with his father, and the Isha is one with the Ish. And so the point is, as was brought up, not all men are worthy. Yeah, not all men are trying to become one with Yeshua. And, I married a very half and half rabid women's lib woman, but yet she had got furniture for her home, perfect nester, homemaker, cook, clean, everything. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, that's a rare woman to find. But the point being, we have fought and fought and fought over her women's libs principles, and yet we have made a wonderful. So this generation, and the first thing, Hasatan, is divide and conquer. God is let's be one. Hasatan is divide and conquer. So what's the role of a man? What's the role of a woman? No. What's the role of God's creation? That we become one flesh. And since we're in two bodies, there has to be a head. And so God proclaimed Yeshua. But what is a helpmeet? I can't remember the word you guys were using earlier. That was that means.
Shoot, we lost you, Annie. Chrissy.
I just see it as like our opposite.
My mute button
Go
got
ahead,
hit.
Yanni.
But Yeshua calls himself our helpmeet. His Yezer. What is that? Somebody that meets what the other person can't. They fill in for the deficit of the other. I mean, that's the true meaning of the word if you boil it down. And we can't save ourselves. So Yeshua gives us the tools and the way to make it by giving us his Torah and helping us live it through our relationship and his chastenings. The man cannot nurture as the woman. The woman cannot go out and protect as the man. But in my heritage, my genealogy goes way back and in 3 lines all the way to Adam. But in one of them, I have the Norse lines and I have berserkers. And the women are shield maidens right next to the men. Now, modern thing like to make a bigger thing of shield maidens than they were. But usually that was a man's wife that went and fought next to him and was right there in the midst of the blood and the carnage and everything. But she wasn't fighting man to man. She was watching her husband's back so he would come home. And so they didn't mind, but they had that kind of a marriage. In the Indian nations, we have, in the Chalagi, a famous chief was called Man-Eater, and she was. But the women step up when the men can't, and they become leaders. And you see that in Scripture. So, yeah, there's many roles, and it's not clearly defined that, boom, this is a woman, you can't go out, drive within the lines. Boom, this is a man, you can't go outside the lines. Because God knows there are people that are all over the place. And there are women that will help make up for a weaker man. And there are men that will help make up for a broken woman. And so it's not a question of a defined role. There's the general roles. But we are to help each other and fill the deficit of the other, our partner. And sustain them, see that their needs are met in the way that Yeshua saw our needs are met. Anyway, I rest.
Thanks, you, Annie. Chrissy, did you have something before we go to Eric? I think your hand was up and then down.
It was, but it's okay. You Annie kind of touched on it. Basically, like to me, when I become pieces,
Shoot.
the one attribute and the man's attribute is
Oh, we
one
lost you.
they
Your
each other.
internet's acting up, Chrissy. Okay, Eric, we'll go over to you.
I was just going to say it was so it really struck home to me what Deneen, what you were saying about the term man and the term woman isn't the applicable term. Husband and wife are the more applicable terms, right? So what is your role as a husband? What is your role as a wife? Um, and so just out of curiosity, I did a quick search just on Torah. And so there were 35 hits for the term husband. And it's just sort of interesting. There's 153 hits for wife, just in the Torah. So significantly more hits for the concept of a wife than there is for the concept of a husband. But nonetheless, the thing that just hit me is that I suspect you guys are doing on Wednesdays, but the is looking at how this term wife, because again, woman is biblical womanhood. The womanhood or manhood thing is probably not significant. What hit home for me, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, is Deneen's comment that we're probably looking at the wrong terms. I don't want a woman. I want a wife. I would hope my wife doesn't want a man. She wants a husband. And what the Bible says about the roles of the wife and the roles of the husband, again, off the top of my head, again, I still think the oneness thing is probably the overarching thing of that. However, it's just interesting, my thought process as I put all together the verses that I saw. There's almost nothing that is in place of this is for a man or this is for a woman. And I think if my mindset had been along with what Deneen had said, of I'm looking for the ones that are applicable to a husband and the ones that are applicable to a wife. If I applied that mindset to the organization of how I did those verses, I think that's way more applicable. And I just wanted to say that I thought that was extremely insightful of biblical manhood, biblical womanhood, probably not nearly as important as biblical husband, biblical wife. And that really hit home when you mentioned that, Deneen, and I think that's probably
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, and I
way
think God,
deeper, a way deeper and more important way to look at it than
yeah,
man, woman. Because again, biblically speaking, we're supposed to be joined as one. So it's not about man, woman. It's about what's a husband supposed to be up to and what's a wife supposed to be up to. Is probably a way more important way to look at it.
and you hit it when you said oneness. I mean, I think God created this. God created an avenue for this oneness called marriage.
Yeah, and of course, and then that goes. We just so in the men's group thing that we do on Saturday evenings that Lance and Hutch and so on and so forth are participating in. We just did marriage and divorce. So the last 2 weeks were marriage and divorce. And so husband, wife, obviously husband, wife, marriage, divorce, the concept of what is a marriage and so on and so forth, and that the oneness thing and all that comes into play. And all that is important for our daily lives and our interactions with our spouses and so on and so forth. But my bigger takeaway is because God uses the analogy of the covenant at Sinai was a marriage covenant, because he uses that as um, as the analogy. And then because he continues with that analogy and talks about a certificate of divorce, the concept of marriage, divorce, husband, wife, um, the importance of our digging into these different roles and responsibilities, although has practical application for our current lives and our current relationships with our spouses. I think the purpose of the understanding of that, biblically speaking, is about our relationship with the Father, and that's what gets you to the understanding that that's why Christ had to die, because if you understand marriage and divorce and the rules associated with that, then you understand if you're of Israel, you're not eligible for the new covenant without the death of the husband. And so the importance of living out and understanding these truths, the Torah about marriage, divorce, husband, wife, How can you understand the analogies that he's using, the parables that he's using? You can't make the connection that he's talking about his relationship with you when he's doing that if you don't understand the basics of what the Torah has to say about these concepts of marriage, divorce, husband, wife.
Amen. Well said. Amber.
I think I just wanted to, I guess, maybe expand a little bit on the concept, Janine. I know that when we discussed, like, you know, what the topic of our women's group would be, right? We did start out with like what it meant to be a biblical wife. And we wanted to expand upon that to make it woman in the context that it wasn't just for people that were married, right? It was, you know, how women should conduct themselves biblically. But taking your point, PD, Eric, I think it was, you know, good to reframe a little bit, right? Like, regardless if you are in the world's eyes, married or not, like you should be acting as a biblical wife to Yah. Like you are married in the sense as, you know, like your relationship with Yah. That should be that marriage relationship. That should be how you are acting out, you know, in the world today, per se. Like not necessarily in the world's eyes of like, are you married? Are you not? But as a woman, it should be based on your relationship, your marriage with Yah, as, you know, him being, you know, your husband per se, like, and you want that to permeate, like, however you go out in the world, however you interact with other people, like that should be, I guess, you know, the mindset that you should have. And so I think, again, just playing, you know, the wordplay, like how that necessarily applies, whether it be woman, wife, bride, bridegroom, and like kind of tying it all together and just kind of reframing our mindsets. Like when we hear, you know, biblical wife, what does that actually mean? Who is that actually speaking to? And that's, I guess, my
Thanks, Amber. Well, this group never disappoints. This was good discussion. You guys want to do this again next week and have like an offline sort of, we'll record it so we can send it out to the group. But think about some questions this week. We may not have the answers, but then, you know, we can discuss it as a group and come up with some stuff and brainstorm and look at the word and toss it around. It's
I like
great.
it. That was cool.
I like it too. I think this is good. I think we'll do that next week. We've only got 4 more Hebrew letters, and then that will free up some time as well for the end. So, Xander. Oh, he didn't mean to raise your hand. Okay, you, Annie.
No, I didn't mean to
You
raise my
did.
hand. I just hit the wrong button.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to, Destin, I thought brought up a good point last week. So like when I was talking about the whole chicken thing and he talked about the gizzard. So I really kind of dove into that, but all birds have gizzards. So I'm back to square one with that. So, but I, that really like focused, like gave me a new angle to look at. And I started going bird by bird, and then all of a sudden I was like, well, all birds. And they were like, yeah, all birds. So I was like, all right, well, back to square one. But thanks for that.
Very good.
Yeah, gizzard replaces teeth. And it's a muscle like the heart. It's amazing. You know, I really enjoy this. I wished I'd had that way back when I was a teen or first really getting serious after getting out of the Navy. Back then, there was no internet, no anything. And sometimes it took me 10 years of research to get an answer to a question. Now I have a lot of answers because I had a lot of the same questions. But it's nice, like Eric said earlier, when you're talking with a group, when you're talking with yourself, you don't see the faults in your reasoning. But with a group, it's good to get back and forth and come together and masticate it out to get the truth of the word. So I really appreciate this and this group. It's amazing. Thank you all.
Thanks, you, Annie. I appreciate you all too. Thank you so much.